Madam Speaker, the Directorate on Corruption and Economic Crime has completed drafting of the National Anti-Corruption Policy, which aims at promoting accountability and providing a framework against which anti-corruption legislation and other interventions may be undertaken. It is worth noting that a successful fight against corruption is necessary for attracting investors into the country to grow the economy and create employment opportunities. Meanwhile, during 2014-15, Botswana made significant progress on efforts to combat the financing of terrorism and money laundering activities. This was done by the enactment of Counter-Terrorism Act, Process and Instruments of Crime Act, and the Anti-Human Trafficking Act. Further, in 2015-16, the country will embark on a national risk assessment program in order to assess and understand the nature and level of the money laundering or terrorist financing risks that we face, and accordingly determine appropriate response to mitigate these risks. Madam Speaker, I now turn to the budget. I shall start with a brief review of the 2013-14 budget outturn and also give a brief summary of the status of the current year's budget before I deal with the 15-16 budget. Madam Speaker, 2013-14 budget outturn. The budget outturn for the 2013-14 financial year was a surplus of 7.22 billion pula, a significantly higher amount compared to the 3.47 billion that had been projected in the revised budget. Total revenues and grants increased by 7.8% from 45.43 billion in the revised budget to 48.95 billion in the final budget outturn. This was attributable to stronger than anticipated performance of mineral revenue occasioned by unforeseen high volume of diamond sales, exchange rate gains, as well as underspending in the development budget by 27%. Total expenditure and net lending, on the other hand, amounted to 41.73 billion against a revised budget of 45.04 billion. And that is where you get the difference of 7.22 billion. 2014-15 revised budget estimates, the current financial year. Madam Speaker, in the 2014-15 financial year, total revenues and grants increased by 2.7% from 50.18 billion in the original budget to 51.54 billion, mainly due to an increase in mineral revenue. Mineral revenues are expected to increase by 13.1%. On the other hand, revised total expenditure and net lending for 2014-15 increased from the original budget of 48.86 billion to 51.26 billion. The increase in the revised expenditure is due to approval in December 2014 by this Parliament of supplementary funding of 1.17 billion for the recurrent budget and 1.41 billion for the development budget. As a result, the revised 2014-15 budget shows a smaller surplus of 280.3 million compared to the original estimate of 1.33 billion. Madam Speaker, now come the 2015-16 budget proposals. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I now present the budget proposals for the 2015-16 financial year. Through this budget, government will address key priority areas which include employment creation, poverty eradication, human capital development, fight against HIV/AIDS, including elimination of mother-to-child transmission, provision of water and power supplies, as well as maintenance of existing infrastructure. Those are the key areas as we allocate this budget. Revenue, Madam Speaker, the proposed total revenues and grants for 2015-16 amount to 55.38 billion pula, of which mineral revenue accounts for 34.4%, customs and excise 29.5%, while non-mineral tax accounts for 17.5%. Mineral revenues are projected to grow at 10.4% from 17.24 in 2014-15 to 19.03 billion in 2015-16. This positive growth is, however, likely to be undermined, I should re-emphasize that, by the downside risks associated with the growth prospects in the global economy, resulting in reduced revenues, specifically diamond revenues. Recurrent budget, proposed recurrent budgets. Madam Speaker, the proposed ministerial recurrent budget for the financial year 2015-16 is 36.7 billion pula. This amount represents a growth of 2.31 billion or 6.7% over the current year's revised budget of 34.39 billion. 6 ministries account for 29.37 billion or 80% of this recurrent budget. The Ministry of Education, Skills and Development, as usual, receives the biggest share of 10.31 billion or 28.1%, which is 512 million pula more than the current financial year's budget. This demonstrates, Madam Speaker, government commitment to increase education funding for what purpose? For the purpose of supporting human capital development. The bulk of this provision at education goes towards student bursaries for post-secondary education at 2.25 billion, subventions to government-supported institutions such as the University of Botswana, Botswana International University of Science and Technology, and others at 1.2 billion. Costs associated with levels of operations arrangement within the teaching staff at 644 million, and food and service charges for secondary schools at 342 million, and in-service training at 235 million. The second largest share of the budget goes to the Ministry of Health at 5.67 billion or 15.5% of the total. This is an increase of 451 million or 8.7% over the current year's budget. The provision for health spending is mainly to address the HIV scourge, including elimination of mother-to-child transmission, at a combined total of 1.11 billion. Medical aid requirements for both central and local government employees, our own employees, at 261.75 million. Fees for medical specialists at 255 million, as well as grants and subventions to mission schools and non-governmental rehabilitation centers at 141 million. The third largest share is allocated to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development at 5.2 billion or 14.2% of the total. This is an increase of 225 million or 4.5% over the current year's revised budget. The proposed budget will mainly cover revenue support grants to district and urban councils at 3.11 billion, and social protection programs at 472 million, comprising provision for old age pensioners at 393 million, destitute allowances at 48 million pula, allowances for people with acute disabilities 20 million, and World War veterans at 10.7 million. The Ministry's provision also covers food supplies for primary schools and clinics at 379 million, transfers under orphan care program at 350 million, as well as maintenance of government facilities at 33.6 million. The fourth largest share goes to the Ministry of Defence, Justice and Security at 5 billion, or 13.7% of the total. This is an increase of 464 million over the current year's revised budget. The proposed budget caters principally for maintenance of aircraft, vehicles, infrastructure and equipment for various security agencies at 375 million. Allowances for security personnel at 771 million. Vehicle replacement requirements for the Botswana Defence Force, the police, Botswana Police and Prison Services at 204 million. And special expenditure for replacement of aircraft and civil defence equipment and computers at 13 million. The fifth largest share at 2.08 billion is allocated to the Ministry of Transport and Communications, constituting 5.7% of the total recurrent budget. This is an increase of 172 million, or 9.1% over the current year's budget. A major portion of the allocation will cover bulk purchases of fuel and lubricants at 345 million. Road maintenance at 334 million. And purchase of servers hosting government computer systems and maintenance of computers at a sum of 224 million. A provision of 223 million has been made to cater for subventions to various parastatals under this ministry, such as the Civil Aviation Authority of Botswana, Botswana Fibre Network, Bofinet, and the Central Transport Organization. The sixth largest share, goes to the Ministry of Agriculture at 1.07 billion. This is an increase of 58 million pula, or 5.8% over the current year's revised budget. A sizable amount of the ministerial budget is allocated to Botswana Agricultural College, Botswana College of Agriculture, which is now transforming into Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources at 99.4 million. Vehicle replacement at 52 million, and maintenance of government assets at 45 million pula. The balance of the ministerial recurrent budget, amounting to 7.33 billion, or 20%, is shared among the remaining ministries and departments, mainly to cover their day-to-day operational costs. Statutory expenditure. The 2015-16 budget allocation for statutory expenditure is 7.9 billion pula, which is an increase of 2.39 billion, or 43% over the current year's revised budget, or 5.54. The growth is principally due to obligations arising from the maturing of government bond W003 and the repayments of loans that we contracted before for development of the country. I now turn to the development budget. Madam Speaker, a total of 12.93 billion pula is proposed for the development budget for the financial year 2015-2016. The largest share of the development budget is allocated to the Ministry of Minerals, Energy and Water Resources at 3.32 billion, or 25.7% of the budget. This will allow government to continue to address the water and power issues facing this country by putting in place appropriate infrastructure. Among the major projects to be funded under this ministry include the North-South Water Carrier 2 at 500 million pula. Kanye and Molepolole connection to the North-South Water Carrier at 150 million pula. Mahalape and Palape network extension at 100 million pula. And Maung water and sanitation at 89 million pula. Maung. Projects aimed at improving the power situation include improving the power situation include Murupule A refurbishment at 100 million pula, electrification of villages at 100 billion pula, Northwest Power Transmission Grid at 50 million pula, Rakola Power Station at 50 million pula, and the Zazibona Regional Power Project at 33 million. The Botswana Power Corporation has also been allocated 1.5 billion pula to cover tariff subsidy and some operational expenses. Subsidy, otherwise the power tariffs will be out of reach of many of our consumers, especially the industries. A total of 150 million has been allocated for the construction of an oil storage facility at Sela Hills in the Katlan district to address various energy needs of the country. The second largest share of 1.6 billion pula, or 12.5% of the development budget, is allocated to the Ministry of Transport and Communications. Some of the major projects to be undertaken by the ministry include upgrading of existing ICT infrastructure to optic fiber, broadband connectivity in strategic areas of Gaborone, Francistown, Maung, and Kasane, as well as Maung-Ngoma optic fiber link to facilitate international connectivity at a total cost of 300 million pula. The construction of Kazungula, Tamalakane, and the Mohembo bridges, Tamalakane again, at 280 million pula. Upgrading of Kasane, Maung, and the Sretzakama airports at 265 million pula. And long-term maintenance contract for the Mankolika Nyejwane and the Rakuna Mabule roads at 190 million. The Ministry of Defense, Justice and Security gets the third largest share of the development budget at 1.3 billion, or 10.2% of the budget, the bulk of which goes to Botswana Defence Force for improving its operational readiness. The Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development gets the fourth largest share of the development budget at 1.2 billion, or 9.3% of the total. This amount will go towards the funding of the Iperechem program at 635 million, primary schools backlog eradication at 341 million, and village infrastructure at 151 million. The fifth largest share of the development budget goes to the Ministry of Agriculture at 1.1 billion, or 8.5%. The bulk of this amount goes towards implementation of agricultural support schemes, notably ISPAD and Limit at 730 million, and the Zambezi water development projects at 200 million, and the Pandamatenga infrastructure development project at 100 million pula. The sixth largest share of the development budget, amounting to 1.04 billion, or 8%, is allocated to the Ministry of State President to finance HIV/AIDS program at 194.8 million, poverty eradication initiatives at 160 million, e-government at 150 million, and digital migration at 130 million for enhancing business environment. Madam Speaker, the balance of the 3.33 billion, or 25.8% of the proposed development budget, is shared by the remaining ministries and departments. From this amount, the Ministry of Lands and Housing is allocated 893 million, or 6.9% of the budget. The major projects under this ministry include Palape and Metsimotava land servicing at 250 million. Self-help housing agency SHA helping the poor at 214 million in order to promote ownership by citizens. And the provision of infrastructure for special economic zones at 82.1 million. The Ministry of Education and Skills Development gets 844 million, or 6.5% of the total budget, to cater for the construction of unified schools at Sabong and Takatokwa, and junior secondary schools at Mau and Francistown at 340 million. In addition, the ministry will construct additional teachers' houses. I need to repeat this, terribly important. The ministry will construct additional teachers' houses costing 100 million. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Health has been allocated 203 million for the construction of nursing staff houses at various locations throughout the country, and for designs of hospitals to be constructed at Mushudi and Moshopa. Madam Speaker, I wish to indicate that a substantial amount of the total budget, amounting to 2.42 billion, i.e. 1.87 billion and 552 million under recurrent and development budgets respectively, has been earmarked for maintenance of public assets. Of the total, 978 million, or 40.4%, is for maintenance of buildings. 705 million, or 29%, is for maintenance of equipment, including computer systems, while 374 million, or 15%, is for road maintenance, as stated earlier under Transport and Communications. The balance of 366 million, or 15%, is for vehicles and other maintenance. Madam Speaker, overall balance of the proposed 15-16 budget. Madam Speaker, with total revenues and grants estimated at 55.38 billion pula, while total expenditure and net lending are forecast at 54.1 billion pula, the result is a projected budget surplus of 1.23 billion, or 0.8% of GDP for the financial year 2015-16. This modest budget surplus will contribute towards the rebuilding of the country's net financial assets and providing a cushion in the event of a future shock, as the case was during the recent global financial crisis. Madam Speaker, that's a short paragraph on public service salaries. Madam Speaker, the government remains fully committed to the Bargaining Council in the process of negotiating public service salaries, and will continue to consult with trade unions. Despite the downside risks with respect to the prospects for diamond revenues, the need to repay outstanding debt, and continue to restore our net financial asset, as I have indicated before, government has nevertheless made an offer to the unions. Such an offer, Madam Speaker, is based on projected financial resources, not available, on projected financial resources. It is therefore expected that the trade unions will appreciate the budgetary constraints facing the government. We hope that the negotiations by the Governing Council will be concluded soon and an agreement reached before the beginning of the next financial year. Why? So that public servants are not disadvantaged. I move towards conclusion, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, let me reiterate the salient message of this budget speech, which is that the country continues to face development challenges such as unemployment and poverty. To address these challenges, government will continue to undertake measures to promote economic growth and diversification. Such measures include maintaining a stable macroeconomic environment for private sector development, continuous review of various pieces of legislation to improve conditions for doing business in this country, and investing in selected infrastructural projects with potential for high impact on economic growth and employment creation. Madam Speaker, an improved budgetary situation. Madam Speaker, among the projects to be implemented in 2015-16 are high-impact mega projects such as the Zambezi Integrated Agro-Commercial Development Project, the North-South Water Carrier 2, Murupule Air refurbishment, and the upgrading of ICT infrastructure to optic fiber. These projects are aimed at creating a conducive environment for private sector development, which is the source of growth and employment creation in the country. The government remains concerned about poor project implementation. In this regard, the government has taken additional measures, such as the establishment of an implementation unit for mega projects under the National Strategy Office. This will complement existing value for money measures by improving project implementation throughout the public sector. Accounting officers will also be expected to monitor project implementation in both their ministries and in state-owned enterprises following under their jurisdictions, with a view to improving operational efficiency. Madam Speaker, one of the hallmarks of this country's public finance management has been its financial discipline, which simply means exercising due care in the use of public finances, with a view to getting value for money for each pula spent. This has been achieved through supportive legal instruments such as the Public Finance Management Act, which empowers various officers at different levels to take appropriate disciplinary action on those who flout the financial management rules. Going forward, Madam Speaker, implementation of the financial regulations will be strictly enforced to ensure financial discipline in the public sector. Madam Speaker, if I conclude, I wish to thank all development partners, both bilateral and multilateral, as well as private foundations, for the continued support that they give to the development of this country. Madam Speaker, I now move that the Appropriation 2015-16 Bill, number 1 of 2015, be read a second time, and I thank you for your attention.